Right, good afternoon everyone, and delighted that you can join us for our innovation workshop today. We've got a brilliant set of speakers, so hope you'll really enjoy it. And I've got probably the best job I've ever had in what must be absolutely years, because today all I'm doing is being the warm-up act for our chair of the Ideas and Innovation Group, strategy group within the LEP, which is Ollie Wignall. Ollie's day job is a very long title, which for shorthand we'll say Operations Director at BAE Systems Submarine, and he is going to be the host for today. So without further ado, over to you, Ollie. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to everyone for taking the time out this afternoon. I'm certainly looking forward to the presentation content, but most importantly, the Q&As, which will have the opportunity for 2 Q&A sessions during the agenda. We have an excellent array of speakers today. We have Ed Perchard, Simon Nokes, Stephen Nicol, Rob Buckingham, Martin Cockcroft and Chris Williams, who I'll introduce properly in advance of their respective presentations. A quick reminder on the agenda, which you should all see on the screen, and we will start very shortly, but just for everyone's record, we will be recording it and it will be available on our website alongside the presentations. Hope everyone's comfortable with that. In terms of the video capability, it will just be for myself and the speakers. So why are we hosting today's workshop? The evidence on which we will hear more from as we get into Stephen Nicol's presentation later suggests that Cumbria underperforms on innovation performance in comparison with similar economic areas. So I think that's something that collectively we sort of need to reflect on, and hopefully when I do the wrap up, we'll have more than enough energy amongst us to be able to move that forward and move the dial on that. You know, I believe there's improvements in innovation that could help address 2 current challenges. That's the one of productivity and one of labour supply in the area. I'm sure that the case studies will really sort of bring to life the innovation in practice. So looking forward to that. In the Cumbria LEP, we very much want to focus on supporting our businesses to innovate and how the lessons from today's workshop can be promoted throughout our wider business community. So in the first instance, I'm very pleased to introduce Ed Perchard, who's the Northern Powerhouse Policy Team Lead at the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. Ed is going to provide us with the current policy framework for innovation. So welcome, Ed.
Thank you very much. Just let me, as always, speak through while I try and work out how to share my screen. Hopefully you should be seeing my title page now. Is that right, Ollie?
Yeah, perfect. And if people want to ask any questions, please put so in the Q&A tab and we'll get to it at the appropriate point in the agenda. So without further ado, off you go, Ed. Thank you.
Great. So thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I've been asked to set the scene for the session, give a little summary of where government is with R&D and innovation, and importantly where it's headed as well. So firstly, to explain where I fit into everything. So I'm in the Northern Powerhouse team in the areas and analysis part of the Cities and Local Growth Unit. So we're jointly owned by BAES and the Department for Levelling Up. So are particularly focused on the local growth aspects of government's work. In my role, I work with policy teams across government, so not just innovation, sort of everything that is sort of pertains to the North's key strengths, to join up central thinking with that of our regional partners, particularly to think about the pan-regional picture in the North. So for innovation, that means talking to BAES teams, talking to the Levelling Up Task Force teams, colleagues at UKRI and Innovate UK, but also means working with our local and regional partners, for example, the LEPs, the MP11 group of Northern LEPs, universities and various other regional groups. I believe that colleagues from the Cumbria team in CLGU are on the call today, are watching. So they are more specifically focused on Cumbria itself. So we do have that sort of that architecture that sort of covers a range of scales. So over the last year or so, government has published a number of strategies that has set out where we want to be heading, both on innovation and local growth, and of course levelling up. Given the time, this will be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'll try and bring us up to present day and set up the rest of the agenda for this afternoon. Apologise if I skim over any of the detail in the slides. I believe they're going to be circulated, so you can have a bit of a closer look in your own time. So a year ago, seems a long time ago, but the Plan for Growth was published in March alongside the budget. And this was the first real strategy to take stock of where we were after the outbreak of COVID and try and set the direction for recovery by building back better in inverted commas. So this plan sets out the government's plans to support growth through significant investment in infrastructure, skills and innovation, the three pillars. But it also identified three key focuses: levelling up, kind of the first time that this had begun to be articulated, net zero and global Britain. Levelling up has obviously been a key word in government in the year since this, and that will crop up again and again as we run through sort of the last year of innovation. But net zero, with the government last year publishing a hydrogen strategy, an industrial decarbonisation strategy, a net zero strategy, and of course hosting COP in the autumn, is a foundational part of the government's vision for the economy. And just a few weeks ago, BEIS published its energy security strategy, which I'm sure will be of particular interest to this area of the country, particularly with its announcements on ambitions for the nuclear sector. So there's a lot of sort of interconnectivity between those key focuses and innovation, as well as the other pillars of growth here. And that's not to ignore the global Britain focus. We have colleagues in the Department for International Trade that are dedicated to Northern Powerhouse, and I'm sure many of you have come across them, who are working to promote the strengths and opportunities across the North. So these bullets at the bottom of this slide show some of the ways that the Plan for Growth addressed innovation, including BEIS's new Help to Growth programs, but it also promised an innovation strategy by the summer, which brings us here to, on the left, the blandest design of any of the documents that we're going to have with this presentation. So in July last year, Innovation Strategy set out a vision to make the UK a global hub for innovation by 2035, by creating the right environment for businesses to innovate and enabling private sector investment to grow, all part of the now quite long-standing goal of hitting 2.4% of GDP in our R&D expenditure by 2027. So the top box here sets out that vision. Businesses having the confidence to invest, making the UK a magnet for global innovation talent, using innovation and our innovation institutions to boost regional growth and levelling up, and tackling major challenges faced by the UK through innovation missions. And that is set under four pillars at the bottom here. So unleashing business, which is supporting the businesses that want to innovate. People, creating an environment that attracts talented innovators from across the world. Institutions and places, ensuring our institutions are serving businesses and places, as it says. And missions and technologies, going after the particular missions and technologies that will give the UK a strategic advantage in the future. So taking a break from the strategies, Spending Review 21 in October. While the strategies we've looked at so far sort of set the direction, none of these were filled with spending commitments. In October, the Spending Review provided an idea of what budgets would support this government direction on innovation, and so this is probably one of the most important slides in this pack. I think it's important to sort of note the fact, and obviously you're all aware, that the Spending Review happened in quite a sort of tough time, COVID and various other pressures on government budgets. But I think that on R&D in particular, there was a real show of commitment on that. The 3-year settlement outlined the public spending per annum on R&D would rise to 20 billion by 24-25. And relating to the institutions pillar of the innovation strategy that we've just seen, UKRI will receive over 25 billion pounds over the next 3 years, reaching 8.8 billion in 24-25, with an increase in core funding for core Innovate UK programs to over 1 billion in 24-25. And that will help connect companies to the capital, skills and connections that they need to innovate and grow. That core funding for Innovate UK saw them, well, whilst that was being sorted out between the spending review and the sort of final confirmation of pots, Innovate UK has outlined its plan of action for delivering the innovation strategy over the next 4 years. So again, this is parcelled out between strategic themes around which to focus activities and the foundations that underpin the innovation support it is providing. Again, these have a firm eye on the future economy, with an emphasis on net zero and future technologies. These themes are those areas that Innovate UK believe its efforts can have a significant impact on the return the UK gains from business innovation, while the foundations at the bottom of the page here are the exploitable assets for businesses and the underpinning principles that have a positive impact on businesses. So again, place and levelling up is now something that sort of is a permeating theme throughout all of these strategies. I believe that Innovate UK colleagues are dialing into this as well, but potentially not until after I finish, which is nice for me, since I'm speaking for them now. So Innovate UK has committed to issuing a delivery plan with detailed actions each year, and will also measure and report on progress in specific areas. This year's delivery plan, I believe, is coming soon and will firm up the details on how Innovate UK will meet its strategic goals. Which brings us to the Levelling Up white paper. So for us in CLGU, this has been, this has been the white whale for the last year. Much of our work has been going towards this in various different ways, so not just R&D. And it's also setting the direction for all of government. So this is a real flagship strategy for government. It's a massive bit of collaborative work across government departments, and is a programme for all of government for how to spread opportunity more evenly across the whole of the UK. You'll hear Michael Gove saying often that talent is spread evenly throughout the UK. Opportunity is not. That's very much the sort of headline of this. And we could have a much longer session focusing just on this document, not least the history of the world that is set out in the first chapter. But it sets 12 missions for 2030 that will anchor policy decisions across government for the next decade. The key thing about those missions, all of the missions, is that very few, if any, rely on one department. They all require work between departments and partners if those targets are to be met. And from speaking to stakeholders across the region, both before and after the publication, I found that one thing that comes up time and time again is that department needs to speak to each other better and not work in silos. And I'm sure that's the same for innovation. And just before I sort of dig into this target, CLGU, my unit, is working very closely on the devolution point, local leadership, and how we boost that. And I think that is sort of a foundational mission that underpins a lot of this, especially where we're thinking about how to get interventions and get improvements in places that work for the places themselves. On innovation specifically, the white paper included the mission on this slide. So by 2030, domestic public investment in R&D outside the Greater South East will increase by at least 40%, and over the spending review period by at least 1/3. This additional government funding will seek to leverage at least twice as much private sector investment over the long term to stimulate innovation and productivity growth. So the white paper is clear that R&D rich economies, both nationally and subnationally, are more prosperous in the long run. And it's similarly clear that, as you see at the bottom there, R&D spending is currently unevenly distributed across the UK. So here's a sort of selection of some of the commitments made in the white paper towards that mission. This includes the aim of investing at least 55% of R&D funding outside the Greater South East by 2025, baking in a levelling up organisational objective into UKRI, working collaboratively to support the growth of R&D hotspots across the UK, and to improve data on R&D spending at a subnational level. This final one is part of a concerted effort to improve subnational data, with the ONS recently publishing its subnational strategy and the development of a new spatial data unit within Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, to give it its full name. And that's something that in the Northern Powerhouse team we're sort of very keen to do, to join up groups that are bringing together evidence and that are able to support government in its sort of quest to improve how we use that local evidence. The paper also signals the importance of later stage R&D in making a tangible difference in places. We've already seen the increase in Innovate UK's core funding, but there are also commitments to factor levelling up into R&D investment decisions, and the announcement of Innovation Accelerator pilots in Greater Manchester, West Midlands and Glasgow, which we'll hear more about when I finish talking. Very keen to hear more about that. And it's not just BASE and UKRI that innovation commitments in the white paper pertain to. DEFRA, DFT, Department of Health, Social Care, and the Ministry of Defence have all had commitments to increase their focus on R&D and innovation efforts. In the Northern Powerhouse team, we've been working quite closely with DHSC and the Office of Life Sciences, as well as regional partners, on sort of the life sciences offer across the north, and how to bring together the various clusters that exist there. But obviously, DFT, both on the sort of net zero and transport side, is a sort of very key factor in the north, both a strength and an opportunity for improvement. And you know, in DEFRA, rural communities and how they're funded will be important. And finally, we come to the UKRI strategy, published just last month. So among the strategic objectives for the next 5 years for them was world-class places, securing the UK's position as a globally leading research and innovation nation, with outstanding institutions, infrastructures, sectors and clusters across the breadth of the country. So, as set out earlier in the Levelling Up white paper, this is driving change across the whole organisation, and embedding levelling up as a key principle. Again, the highlights here underpinning this revolve around supporting the growth of clusters, development of evidence, engaging with place-based organisations, understanding the distribution of UKRI actions, and working in partnership sort of across the board. And I think through all of these strategies, you're seeing, you know, as we'd want to see, consistent themes on how we want to improve the landscape in general. And so on to my final slide. I mentioned that levelling up is a cross-government effort. On innovation, we're working with BASE, sort of across BASE, UKRI, Innovate UK, but also with the DLUC, Department for levelling up structures, which are currently being developed to enable us to deliver the whole levelling up programme in as sort of efficient a way as possible. And then also with the other government departments, to embed the principles of levelling up throughout their work. I think a final thing here to emphasise is that the white paper mission is not only to increase domestic public investment, also to leverage at least twice as much private sector investment over the long term to stimulate innovation and productivity growth. So government, so those teams that I've just mentioned, and us, are very keen to hear what you think it would take to achieve that leverage in the long run. My email's on this slide, so please do get in touch with any questions or thoughts, either for myself or colleagues across government. So that is the end of my slides. If there are any questions, please do let me know.
Ed, thank you very much. Yeah, hopefully that's given everyone a good framework for the rest of this event. And again, please put your Q&A questions, and we'll get to that shortly. Can I now invite Simon Nokes Executive Director Policy and Strategy at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, to tell us more about the recently announced 3 innovation accelerators, one of which is Greater Manchester, and really how and what this could mean for Cumbria. So welcome, Simon.
Thanks very much, well, welcome to you all. As Ollie said, I kind of have a dual role, both as Executive Director for Policy and Strategy at the Combined Authority, but also acting as the Chief Executive of the Greater Manchester Local Enterprise Partnership. We've got an integrated model in Greater Manchester. I'll talk a little bit, and it feels slightly like an imposter, but I've done an awful lot of work across the Northwest. We used to work for the RDA in a previous life, and obviously work with the 5 Northwest LEPs quite closely. So really keen that, as this first slide says, we have a plan around innovation in Greater Manchester that is wider than the Accelerator. I'll talk about the Accelerator in a second, but our plan is what we call Innovation Greater Manchester. And it's very much about the role that Greater Manchester can play as part of the Northern Powerhouse, and hopefully reflect in some of the comments that I'm going to talk about. If we go to the next slide, that'd be great. Thanks, Jen. This transition, perfect. I mean, this really just picks up on what Ed was talking about in terms of just plotting the level of both of government and university R&D spend and the business spend in the various different regions in the UK, and it's obviously really clear that the impact and benefits of R&D expenditure are not felt equally across the UK. And Nesta produced a report about the missing 4 billion, suggesting that if that was found, if you like, or R&D money was increased, R&D expenditure was increased in the public sector sense, that would lead to an additional 250 million of public expenditure in Greater Manchester. If the next slide, we then almost on the back of that talked about how we can build innovation in Greater Manchester as part of our post-COVID economic recovery strategy, and I'll talk a lot about the role of Innovation Greater Manchester as being our strategy for driving innovation-led economic growth in all parts of Greater Manchester. So it's not just the clever science stuff, and I'll talk about the clever science stuff in a second, but it's very much about innovation-led economic growth in all parts of the city region as part of our overall plan for this new economic vision about a fairer, greener, more prosperous economy, and the Innovation Greater Manchester approach has been led from the left and led by private business, collaborating with the universities and the public sector. So it's very much driven by the business community rather than by the public sector. We deliberately set out a vision, thanks Jen, we deliberately set out a vision for what we want to achieve through innovation-led, through Innovation Greater Manchester. You can next slide, Jen. So we set out a vision by 2030 of what we want to achieve, and as I said, that's about innovation-led economic growth in all parts of the conurbation. It is about building on our global strengths, and we particularly through the science audits believe we have global strengths and confirmed working with government around advanced materials and manufacturing, around health innovation, around digital and creative, and around green technologies. Those are our global strengths, but that in itself is not enough to transform the approach to innovation and innovation-led economic growth in Greater Manchester. We also need to, and a lot of those assets and scientific assets so far are concentrated in the conurbation core. What we need to do is to think about how we use those in far different ways to drive the whole economy. So that is partly, and I'll talk a little bit more about this through the Innovation Accelerator in a second, it's partly about specialist facilities elsewhere within the conurbation. It's partly about how we drive innovation activity in our town centres, and it's partly about creating an innovation ecosystem. And I'll mention more on that in a second. It's very much also about innovation in the the sort of narrow sense, i.e. new to market innovations, but it's also about innovation adoption by a far wider range of companies across Greater Manchester. And that's about building an environment where we create this ecosystem, where we do have investment in finance, investment in skills, and investment in the infrastructure that's needed and business networks that are needed to drive that ecosystem. And our aim is to have high quality jobs and more productive firms across the conurbation, driven by what we call our frontier sectors. But as you can see in that slide, ultimately with the aim of reducing health and economic inequalities across the conurbation. So if we can have the next slide, Jen, please. So we're now basically looking at what kind of key things that we're trying to achieve. I've talked about innovation-led growth by building our innovation capacity. And that, as I say, is partly about the kind of strengths in our core areas. It's partly about the adoption capacity and capability of our companies. And partly that's about attracting new companies. Partly it's about supporting indigenous firms, and partly it's about scaling up entirely new enterprises. And I talked about this ecosystem, and I'll talk about our sector strengths in a second, but in terms of the ecosystem being fundamental, and in some ways, just as important as those specialist R&D facilities and investments that might be made through the Accelerator. So we're going to the next slide, Jen, please. We've developed a board that is driving that whole approach, and will be therefore working on the Accelerator and working with government on the Accelerator and the capturing the kind of share of the 100 million that Ed talked about. And that board, and it doesn't matter specifically about the names, but it's a triple helix board, so it's got public, private, and government and university investment into the board, and members of the board. We've got a professional, independent advisor, scientific advisor. We've got representation from the public sector in terms of the economic agenda, and really strong representation from the private sector, not just from within Greater Manchester, but wider than that as well, representing our key sectors, our key 4 sectors that I mentioned in terms of our strengths, and also in terms of the role of private finance on the board as well. So just touching on the Accelerator, Jen, if we could have the next slide. The Accelerator for me is a subset, if you like, of the overall innovation plan for Greater Manchester. And it's about how we work with government to drive our strengths in particular areas that will catalyse that wider innovation approach across the conurbation as a whole. And Ed's already talked about the kind of policy background to the accelerators, so I won't dwell on that, other than to say we do not see the Innovation Accelerator or IGM as being about getting our share of £100 million. That's not what it's about. It's about how we change the dial on innovation within the conurbation and beyond. And I'll talk about the links to Cumbria in a second. But how we change the dial and therefore use the 100 million or the share of 100 million as a catalyst to do that, and a catalyst to far wider investments and far wider change, both private and public. The pilots, if you've got the next slide, Jen, the pilots got a range of objectives in terms of stimulating economic growth, in terms of social and economic benefits, in terms of new partnerships with government, and in terms of looking at the effectiveness of the Innovation Accelerator approach in order to drive new policy measures. So moving on to the next slide, Jen, please. I wanted to just talk now about investing in those assets to drive real change. And I've mentioned our 4 frontier sectors as we see them. I believe, and this is still very much for debate, and the sort of timeline that we're working to is to produce an Innovation Accelerator plan for government by June, and then to submit projects that we might want to be funded as first projects by September. And I very much believe that we will talk about kind of key areas, and using one example. Those key areas, as I've mentioned, the 4 of them, are all areas which link very much into the whole of the Northern Powerhouse agenda and to the frontier sectors in the north of England. And just taking one example around advanced materials, you could regard advanced materials as just being a sort of a narrow thing, or actually, if you look at the application of advanced materials, then there are huge opportunities to focus on the role of advanced materials in driving things like clean growth, the energy sector, the role of advanced materials in driving low carbon aviation, for example, the role of advanced materials in health and in health innovation. So actually, a focus on advanced materials naturally gives us opportunities, and we want to take those opportunities, not just to think about Greater Manchester, but to think about how we work with the rest of the north, and particularly the northwest, on the applications of those advanced materials to driving growth. So the role of advanced materials, as I say, in the energy sector, and particularly collaborating with you on nuclear in terms of some of the assets that we share in that regard. So we can have the final slide, please, Jen. So just using an example, obviously, the energy security strategy is fundamental for government. Nuclear is an important part of that, a very fundamental part of that. The University of Manchester has its Dalton Institute in Cumbria. And we believe that advanced materials are key, as I say, to that energy sector, and the supply chain for advanced materials and for our other core strengths are across the whole of the northwest and the north. So we're really keen to do 2 things through our accelerator. One is to work with you to look at how we can drive our innovation accelerator, build that cluster approach that government's looking for through the accelerators, to take advantage of and work with you on the opportunities that Cumbria represents in terms of joint working with us to shape that accelerator. But secondly, to think about the lessons learned from the accelerator, and how that, if successful, everybody across the north has an incentive to make it successful, because if successful, government will then roll it out as a kind of policy development, and it will then apply to other areas and other clusters in other places. So see massive synergy between ourselves and yourselves in the way the accelerator works, and look forward to working with you on that. I'm very happy to take any questions when we get to that point in the agenda. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Simon, many thanks for that really informative presentation. And as you say, when we get to the Q&A section, it'd be really interesting to see whether people can take time to ask a few questions there. Certainly, I was listening to it from living and working in Cumbria, and really looking forward to see how we could leverage that for the area. I'm now pleased to introduce Stephen Nicol, who's Cumbria LEP's economist, who's been working directly with the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council to better understand innovation in Cumbria and to identify best practice that can promote in a way that doesn't present any commercial issues for the businesses that we've worked with. So really looking forward to hearing this part of the pitch. Hopefully it should all knit everything together ready for some good Q&A.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Thanks, Ollie, and welcome everybody. Yeah, I mean, we've started at UK level. We've whizzed through Greater Manchester and the Northern Powerhouse, and we're now coming down to Earth and Cumbria. So I'm going to bring out the findings of some work that was commissioned for Cumbria by the LEP, but it was funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, who have been and are interested in how innovation works and links from the business base, particularly SMEs, into the science base. But also their interest was piqued by some earlier work that was done in Cumbria about how this might operate in Cumbria as an example of a remoter and a rural part of the UK. And it was interesting what Ed was saying about the national strategy and the recent UKRI strategy in the place strand here, because I think there are some lessons and messages from Cumbria which kind of feed into that. And the research also provided an opportunity for the LET to delve into some more detail into the whole topic of innovation, which we know is very important as part of our competitiveness. And as you said earlier, Ollie, our productivity. And it was a theme in our local industrial strategy produced in 2019, where we identified that we did have some world-leading innovation, but there was a deficit across the whole economy and what was called a patchy innovation ecosystem. So we agreed to work a brief with EPSRC. We started the work February last year, and the work was largely completed in November. I say largely completed because we're still working on some follow-up case studies and writing those up as part of this work. And I know some of the firms that have been involved can very kindly agree to be engaged in that. Part of the work we tried to identify those firms in Cumbria that appeared to be most innovation active, most involved in innovation, and there were two sources for that. One was some work done looking at firms that had involved in public sector grant or other schemes over the years, and another was a web scraping exercise that used keywords to identify companies based in Cumbria. The two combined together, and then taking out duplicates, firms that no longer trading and so on, we came up with about 350 or so firms in Cumbria that were sort of prime firms involved in innovation. To put that into context, that's just over 2% of all private sector firms in Cumbria with at least one employee, but about 8% of all private sector firms with more than about 10 employees. We're very grateful for the firms that cooperate, and I'm just going to give you a taste of what came out of that research in this presentation. So starting off by measuring overall levels of innovation in Cumbria, and I mentioned that there was concern that on average we weren't doing as well in Cumbria as the average. It's worth being clear what we mean by innovation. There's been a lot of talk about R&D expenditure. Well, innovation is a much broader concept. It's about significantly improving products and processes. It's about looking at organisation and structures and practices. It may be about internal R&D, but it's a host of things. So that's the international definition of what innovation means. And you see it's quite a broad and inclusive definition. So what do we find for Cumbria? Well, the UK Innovation Survey is carried out every couple of years, and it is possible to get the data below a regional level. And that indicates that on average, Cumbrian firms are less likely to be innovation active than the regional or the national averages, which are about 38 to 40%. But there's small sample sizes, and they bounce around from year to year, so we can't be too certain about that. But we do know two things for sure, which is when we look at the extent to which, firstly, Northwest and then Cumbrian firms actually get access to and engage with national innovation schemes run by Innovate UK, and also research activity funded by the EPSRC, we know that the strike rate in terms of accessing that is well below representation in terms of number of firms, GVA, manufacturing GVA, whichever measure you want to use. So that on average, Cumbrian firms are less likely to be engaged in those forms of innovation, at least that involve some of those kind of big ticket, more advanced innovation that's been talked about earlier. Paradoxically, as I say, that the self-reported levels of innovation in the 2020 Cumbria Business Survey were much higher than that. So they were coming in at something like 2/3 of all firms with more than 10 employees were self-defining themselves as innovation active. Now, the things aren't entirely comparable because that was a very brief telephone survey and it doesn't have the same depth and rigor as the UK Innovation Survey. But it just shows that measuring innovation itself is quite a tricky, slippery concept. But if I was to characterize innovation in Cumbria, I mentioned the sort of weak innovation ecosystem on average. but that is not true in parts of the economy. So Cumbria is a very unusual place, as most of you will know, in that we've got this incredibly deep but rather narrow innovation ecosystem that's focused on the nuclear sector and nuclear engineering. We're going to hear one of the case studies actually about some project opportunities in that area. It's particularly driven by the decommissioning part of the nuclear cycle rather than nuclear new build, though obviously some of the skills and technology is transferable. There's also obviously a very significant defence nuclear sector and nuclear submarine building programme in Barrow, obviously, which Ollie is very well aware of, which arguably fits in this sector, or maybe arguably sits slightly outside this sector. So that's where most of the action is in Cumbria in terms of significant levels of R&D and engagement with universities on R&D activity. One of the very interesting things that's happened over the years, as many of you know, is there's been some spillover of that technology and expertise into other, often described as extreme environments, such as offshore oil and gas, potentially some offshore renewables, and into the defence sector. And when I carried out the survey and spoke to some of the firms, one of the things they're really interested in doing is how can they take some of their technology that's been developed for nuclear, for oil and gas, for defence, and how can they apply that to the green growth and clean energy sectors. And then outside that main core, we've got these very strong islands of very successful, innovative firms that are operating in, generally speaking, very different and often not very complementary sectors. One of whom we'll be getting a case study from later this afternoon, where they're doing some really excellent innovation work, operating in global markets, world leaders in their fields, but have very few links generally with other firms in Cumbria. There is an island, or connected island of firms in South Cumbria operating around sort of technology to do with LEDs, which is a bit of an exception, but by and large, we've got that main area of innovation, we've got these islands of activity, and then quite a lot of small firms and individuals doing some great stuff that I've come across in the work, but at a relatively small scale. And the whole of that is not really very connected together. So most people are operating in some form of silo, so that the innovation ecosystem doesn't really operate as such in Cumbria. And it's certainly not as deep and rich and spread as, say, the one in Greater Manchester, which is partly a reflection of the nature of our economy and partly of our sector specialisms. And then in the research, we sort of came across different types of innovating companies, and some of you on this workshop might identify yourself in these 5 categories. So we've got some firms in Cumbria that have introduced some really great products, but then they have tended to sort of rest on their laurels. So once they've done that, they're very happy with their world. Maybe they're retiring to the Bahamas. We've got a small number of what we call revolutionary innovators. So the sort of typical tech entrepreneurs come up with a bright idea, trying to develop it. There are some of those in Cumbria, but not as many as places like Manchester. Willing and struggling entrepreneur innovators. Importantly, a lot of firms identifying the need to innovate for various reasons I'll explain in a minute, but struggling because of time, pressures on management or cost. And then we've got core innovators, firms that are doing this all the time, often because they're in demanding markets, working with demanding customers, often on quite short time cycles. And then more strategic innovators who are taking a longer-term view, who are investing in R&D, who are developing long-term relationships, often with different universities and university departments, to improve their competitive advantage in the long term. And I think in terms of where the biggest difference can be made in Cumbria, it's around working with the firms that are inside that band that are put there, particularly the willing and struggling innovators, where probably the greatest impact can be reached. So what are the drivers of innovation do we find from the survey? Well, no great surprises that it was need to improve quality, to increase profit sales, and to reduce costs, very much driven by either the needs of existing clients. I mentioned some firms operating in very demanding sectors and very demanding clients, or because firms recognise the need to diversify into other sectors. And I said one of the patterns in Cumbria is firms starting in one sector with a particular technology or production process and moving it to other sectors. Interestingly, personal satisfaction and ambition came out as an important driver, and the people side of innovation is something we really mustn't lose sight of. And then environmental impacts and regulatory economic drivers, and some evidence that those are increasingly important, certainly the environmental side of things in framing innovation. And then who do firms work with on innovation? So this probably wasn't what the EPSRC wanted to hear in some respect, but it's very much customers and clients and suppliers who are the main groups with whom firms in Cumbria are innovating and working with on. It might be a wider group if they're part of a larger firm, or external consultants and advisors. On the whole, the universities were not up there as the main source of collaboration, and those that were largely based in the north of England, within a sort of a couple of hours travel time of Cumbria. Lancaster University really featured as very important, and the university that many more links were with than any other. Interestingly, a lot of that's through the management school and the management programs that they've been working with in Cumbria over many years that have led into the innovation discussion and dialogue there. So there's something about those long-term relationships and different entry points into universities. And then in terms of the barriers to innovation, I've already touched on these. Really the main ones are around, might be described by firms as time, but it's really financial resources to be able to devote to innovation. Most firms, unless they're very large, don't have a separate department, and so it often falls on the shoulder of existing management to carve out time to invest in innovation. So time and resources, knowing where to go for external support, so particularly dealing with universities, can be very difficult for companies, not knowing really where to start and who to go to. And a particular issue was around commercialization of ideas. So we can come up with an idea, but we just don't have the time, energy, and resources to turn that into something that we can make money with. And that's as important as actually coming up with the initial idea. So this is a key thing. So it's not about the R&D as much as about the commercialization of that and turning that into profit and hence GVA. So just a few ideas that came out of the research and what can we do about this. And there's certainly something around dealing with deal with the sort of time and cost barriers that could be done at a local level, and particularly for smaller companies, helping them through that sort of difficult proof of concept stage that they need to go through. I mentioned the move to low carbon, and so a technology opportunities map to help companies identify where they could start investing time and effort with their technology and innovation could be really important and helpful in Cumbria, but obviously something could operate at a wider level. I mentioned the people side, so ways of networking innovators and like-minded people, either within sectors or across sectors, is really helpful. And there are some good networks in Cumbria that are developing, and there's certainly an opportunity around IT and digital, which there's some great small companies doing things, but they're not really connected together. Then there's sense in which there's that sector grouping as there would be in Manchester. And then one of the interesting things is that master's students came out as a really helpful resource to small companies in terms of helping take forward their innovation. So those kind of master's projects in companies, it's maybe slightly a kind of old hat, but it's seen as actually really being quite an effective way of helping companies with their innovation. So that's it. Happy with others to take any questions on that.
Thank you. I was certainly listening intently to that, and there's quite a bit of reflection personally on some of the things that you've talked about there. But we have a couple of questions that have come in via the chat, the Q&A chat. I'm not sure if we can go directly to the individuals so they can talk it through, but firstly, reading the question here from Adrian Davis Johnson. Are you able to speak, are you?
No, it's
Okay.
only in writing, Ollie, so we'd need you to kindly read
That's
and get
fine.
the panel to respond.
And does everyone
Thank you.
else see the questions, do they?
Yeah.
Okay, so reflection on the question here, if I sort of get to the point, yeah, the real question here as I'm reading it is, will there be the opportunity for a few strings attached route to innovation revenue funding to really sort of focus its efforts in the right areas, rather than, I think, rather than just larger capital funding. I'm hoping at the end of this that there's 3 suggestions of how we're going to move this agenda forward in the region that hopefully should answer that question in terms of making it, let's say, a little bit more agile for some of our small and medium-sized businesses across Cumbria. But Joe, did you want to answer this in particular? I mean, because quite often bureaucracy can get in the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really one it'd be good for Ed, Simon and Stephen to reflect on. But at headline level, Ollie, what I would say is there is a general concern from the business community around the availability of grant funding at this time, given the very, very challenging business circumstances for businesses, 30-year high inflation, significant increase in all costs, labour supply challenge, supply chain issues. At this point in time, they really do feel that some incentivisation is both necessary and important to deliver on the growth agenda. And it's something that we've raised with colleagues in Treasury, in DLUC, and we're going to be very interested to understand how, if at all, shared prosperity fund, levelling up, etc., are going to give some support to the business community. Clearly, we're going to share our own local little things that we want to do. We've also got something been circulated from HMRC today around innovation, basic tax relief and support, which we'll share. But I'm sure Ed, Simon and Stephen will have some thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
I'll just jump in to say, I mean, I can't speak for any funding that is coming down the track, and can't really speak for any of the departments or agencies that might be providing that. I will say that, as per my last slide, government is very much in listening mode at the moment. I think that this point is one that, as you say, Joe, has been received both from yourselves and elsewhere across the UK, and I think speaks to that part of the levelling up agenda on local leadership and sort of putting more powers in the hands of local leaders. So I'm very happy to pass this on again, and as any other sort of like points around barriers or opportunities, or sort of how you think government can address the private sector investment question. Very, very pleased to sort of continue that conversation.
There's a build on that, if people can see the Q&A panel. Adrian's contributed a little bit more. The real question is, can Cumbria have an innovation revenue fund, e.g. Innovus? Yeah, it worked in the past and was killed because the only money available was EU, which is useless for nuclear firms, tourist firms and agricultural, basically Cumbria in reality. Is there any more reflections on that to try and answer the more specific question?
Yeah, I mean, I'll come in if that's okay. I mean, I think Adrian, certainly our plea to government around the Innovation Accelerator is to make sure that there are as few strings as possible. I think maybe one of the other ways of answering that is actually in relation to the other question, which is about the Shared Prosperity Fund, because the Shared Prosperity Fund is a fund that is devolved to localities, and where, although we have to, or still working through the details of it, we do have to tell government what we're going to do with that money and the outcomes that we're going to achieve. There does, certainly at this point, seem to be a lot more flexibility around how that money is used locally, and certainly we are going to be looking in Greater Manchester about the way in which we use innovation funds and the Shared Prosperity Fund alongside each other to drive our wider economic agenda. So, obviously can't speak for how Cumbria is going to use its Shared Prosperity Fund monies, but it certainly is a source of funding that is more akin to some of the things that you were talking about there in terms of sort of regional growth funding, where there is, at this stage anyway, a lot more local flexibility about the way it's used.
If I just add to what Simon said, I totally agree with that. And in fact, I mean, Adrian must have been planted. The question he asked was basically one of the suggestions I made in my final slide, that with UK Shared Prosperity Fund, there is now an opportunity to have something at a Cumbria level like this, because the money that's been available from central government has been essentially for capital funding. You know, it's building new sites and premises, but it hasn't really helped innovation on the whole, maybe with one or two notable exceptions. So there is an opportunity with the Shared Prosperity Fund, and I think something that's sort of seed cord funding for innovation in Cumbria would be money well spent. There's also, I think, I mentioned that Cumbrian firms have been not so successful in accessing some of the national pots of money, and certainly anything that can support them and encourage them to do that, I think is a good way of increasing innovation. So I think there is a way forward. I mean, it's all, the devil is in the detail, and whether the amount of money available is actually going to be able to support a substantial fund, but at least there's the opportunity there now with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund.
Okay. Thank you everyone for participating. There was a second question from Matthew, but I think we've potentially answered that.
Can I just jump into the UK SPF question, because I think we did move on to it. I think I'd just stress that I think there's an importance in the UK SPF of local authorities working with external partners and listening to the asks of the communities, rather than imposing plans on themselves. And there are three investment priorities through the UK SPF: communities in place, supporting local business, and people and skills. And I think those latter two, reflect positive, are pertinent to innovation. The UK SPF ramps up more towards skills and employment from 24-25, which is it's relevant. But in the short term, I think it can be best used to support private sector innovation through being genuinely informed by local business priorities. And so I think local authorities need to be looking outwards and listening to external bodies, including universities, as to how best to utilise that.
Thank you. So thanks for your questions, and to the panel for responding to those questions so well. Thank you very much. We now turn to making it happen, and I'm delighted to welcome our next three speakers, who will be providing their presentations back to back. Yeah. Firstly, we're going to hear from Rob. I apologise, we've got an announcement going on in the background. Nuclear site for you. I apologise, it repeats the thing twice. Yeah. We're now going to hear from Rob Buckingham, a Director of Race and UK AEA, then from Martin Cockcroft, New Technology Group Manager at Futamura, and thirdly from Chris Williams, Technical Director at M-Sport. So welcome, and thank you for taking the time this afternoon. Over to Rob.
Excellent. Let me just share my screen. Hello, everybody. Let's see if this works. Fine. Great. I'm getting there. Hello. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you all this afternoon. Thank you, Joe and Ian, for your kind introductions, and it's great to be taking part. I've I've modified my slide slightly during the previous talk, and we'll get to the final one, which hopefully you'll like. Anyway, I'm going to talk to you about RAICo, which is a thing that's happening in Cumbria, which should probably sensibly be happening in some other part of the country. And therein lies the challenge, doesn't it? How do you get really world-class stuff happening away from London, Oxford and Cambridge? And I'm actually speaking from Oxfordshire right now, and I run one of the largest robotics labs in the country, certainly probably the largest nuclear robotics lab in the world. And I'm speaking on behalf of a group of people who are coming together to talk about robotics for the nuclear sector, but wider. So I'm speaking on behalf of the NDA, Sellafield, University of Manchester and the National Nuclear Laboratory. So a little bit of, is the volume okay? I'll leave the volume as it is. A few pictures to get you thinking. Great. So those are just some of the projects that I'm involved with. This is about a £40 million per annum program of robotics and artificial intelligence. And RAICo builds on all this stuff and combines some things with the Authority, Atomic Energy Authority, University of Manchester and others, working very closely with the NDA and Sellafield. And there are two primary use cases. And this is about, I think, doing two things. One is completing our missions. We're both, the NDA and the authority are both what's called non-departmental public bodies of BAYS. So we're effectively parts of government. And we have jobs to do. We've been told to do a thing by government. And I believe we should try to do that work as well as possible and leave as big an impact, positive impact, in the communities in which we're working. So for the NDA, it will be great to carry on doing the operations at Sellafield and other places, and decommission well, and enable people to develop tools and skills that can then outlast even the NDA's mission. And similarly for the authority, our aim is to build a fusion power plant. And if we can do that, it's a big if, but it's it's one definitely worth going for. If we can do that, then humanity is changed, because fusion is a potential power source for the next 1,000 years. And so those missions, then can we align them with ambition? And our ambition is to have an impact in Cumbria and the UK in the field of robotics and artificial intelligence. And this stuff has to be end user led, because I think that we have too much tech push and not enough pull. So we're not pulling the new innovation into these industries that need them, and therefore delivering the value. And that driving that value is a way of creating the growth that then stimulates further innovation. So, a 50 million per annum RAI program in Cumbria, that's not going to happen immediately, but we've got to start. We're starting. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And that's certainly possible. A number of jobs, enabling diversification, and a little bit of the wet weather tourism and inspiring the next generation. We want young people involved with this, and we can. I completely agree with the comment from Michael Gove about the talent being everywhere, and how we get that next generation, as well as the existing ones as well, but get them motivated and engaged in order to take on these new challenges with technology and the like is really key. So momentum, we are doing stuff. We've opened a facility in Whitehaven on the harbour. That's the picture on the top left. That's called RAICo 1. And there's Trudy Harrison, who came along just before it opened, actually, because of elections, but that was Trudy visiting. And then a bunch of people above, including Japanese people from Sellafield there, and University of Manchester and Race. And we've also installed a load of equipment, some really world-class equipment that we've transferred from Oxford and also from other parts of University of Manchester and the like. You can have a look at the Scrabble board if you want, but that comes from a comment from Ottoline Laser, where she said we should be scoring triple word scores. And that sent me thinking. I heard that talk, and that's my old Scrabble board. I used to play Scrabble a lot as a kid, apparently. Anyway, and there is a plan to build a bigger facility called RAICo 2, and we'll see. That is dependent on how RAICo 1 goes a little bit, but also investment and aligning that investment to put it in the right place. And the video that's going to run now is a few robots in action in RAICo 1. This is me. So I was presenting this remotely to Bristol, a Bristol event, and then we used these two robots are called Spot, and from an American company called Boston Dynamics. They're not autonomous. They're controlled by people who are just out of camera shot. But there you go. This is another example. I'll turn the sound off on this one so I can talk over the top of it. But this is another example which is perhaps less publicly interesting. But this is all about glove boxes and putting robots into glove boxes rather than people's hands. And this is a way of both increasing safety and driving up productivity. So our thought is, how can we actually make glove box work more efficient and safer at the same time? And this is technology that wasn't possible a few years ago, and it's coming about now because these robots are starting to be quite cheap, thousands of pounds rather than hundreds of thousands of pounds, and the software that's around to control them is now available. It used to be the case that you would have to almost do a PhD to work out how to do this stuff, but now it's much more available. So the tools, the pieces are there to bring together into integrated solutions. One of the big projects that we're up with doing at the moment is with TEPCO over in Japan. So there are lots of opportunities to actually do things globally. And if we can do things in the UK which create export potential, then we should be shipping that globally. I won't show you that one. And this is the slide that I nabbed from earlier, and it took me a few minutes to actually sort of just hijack. I hope I'm not publishing inappropriately, but yeah, leveling up, future economy, growth at scale. So I read through all of the pieces and I thought, yeah, it's the whole darn lot. And I think this is the point, is that there are these types of interventions that the money's going to be spent by the government through the NDA, through the Atomic Energy Authority. So the challenge is, what can we do that exposes that to more people, gets more people engaged, and so builds their careers, builds future careers, as well as delivering our mission. So that's really, I think, the message that I want to get. This is exactly the sort of example that will do what we all want to happen in Cumbria. There you go. That's me done.
That was excellent. Thank you, Rob. Can we hand over to Martin if you're good to go? Just remind people Q&A. We will be, after these three case studies, referring to the Q&A and going to the panel to answer the questions. So without further ado, Martin.
Yep, I'm just going to share my
Welcome.
screen. Thank you for having me. Is that showing? Can you see my slides there?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Excellent. So yeah, as I said, thank you for inviting me along, and it's a pleasure to come and talk a little bit about innovation, what that means at Futamura. So I'm going to start, if my slides work. There we go. I'm going to start for people that don't know, because a lot of you might not know who Futamura are, where we are. So that's a picture of the site. We're based here in Wigton in Cumbria. It's been there a very long time. It's now a shared site between 3 different companies. So a company called Innovia Film, CCL Secure, who do the banknote, and ourselves, Futamura, Japanese-owned company. And we're basically leading global producer of what is now mainly compostable cellulose-based packaging films. And we employ about 300 people here on the site, and globally 1,500 people split between America, Japan, and us in Cumbria. So hopefully that gives you a little brief introduction to the company. About myself, I've been in innovation research for 24 years, and as I was introduced as the new technology group manager. What that really means is research and innovation. We're the research and innovation group for the UK and US operations of the business. And first of all, you probably want to know what I'm going to talk about. I was given 15 minutes, and I was actually invited to do this by our sales and marketing director, a guy called Andy Swin, who's probably listening into this. And at that stage, I didn't really have much breathe, so I thought we should cover 3 key topics, which for me would be fishing, holidays, and food. And then I thought about it for a couple of minutes and said that's probably not what we should do. So I'm going to talk about some actual innovation in the business instead. So first of all, the angle I want to give you is really thinking about how innovation plays a role in what we do. So what is innovation to us? Why is it important? I'm going to give you a little view of how do we go about it? How do we approach innovation within our business? Probably a few sneak peeks of what we're doing. And then challenges, I'll just leave you with this statement. What could possibly be the pitfalls of innovating in this long-established business using a 100-year-old process in the depths of Cumbria? I can't see why that's a challenge at all. But so that's what we'll try and cover. What I will say is, because I'm trying to cover a lot, I'm not going to go into any great detail. Okay, this is a high-level overview of all these different areas. First of all, though, what is innovation? And this kind of really marries and matches a little bit with what Stephen was presenting before, because I think innovation can be a little bit misunderstood. I think everybody sees it as this revolutionary thing, but if you really try and define it as a word, then you get things right from the range of just alteration, just tweaking, just improving, all the way up to this revolutionary sort of stuff. So actually innovation in Futamura should be each of these. We should be thinking about both improving what we do today, but also thinking very much about the future, and that's a theme that I'll touch on. But also when I googled this, and this is just dragged from the web there, one thing stood out, which is this statement here: innovation is crucial to the continuing success of any organization. That absolutely drives Futamura's core, and that's very much led as well from, because we are a Japanese-owned organization. You can see that that's in every decision that they make. Makes it a really exciting place to work, by the way, being somebody who is, interested in innovation. So if I could wrap that up for you, what does that mean to us? What does innovation mean to us? It means what we try and do. 2 key things. First of all, it's really thinking forward. Okay, so this is just imagine the future world, and then really try and understand our place in that. What will Futamura offering in that future world? And the key to that is remaining relevant. So in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, we've got products that really are things that people want to buy. They're important still within the world. That's one of our key ways of thinking about innovation. But secondly, it's about understanding that the world is ever changing and evolving. Even in the world of packaging, it might not be the most exciting thing to a lot of people, but it is changing, and it changes for lots of different reasons, whether that be from legislation, regulation, or if you just like the demands of the customer or new products that are coming on the market. So look out for what those opportunities might be. A really good example of that at the minute is the SUPD, so single-use plastic directives, where plastic is being banned in a lot of applications. So we can say, okay, how does our product now solve some of those challenges that people who want to use packaging are going to face? It's the sort of thing I'm talking about there. Okay, so how do we, hopefully that gives you a sort of a snapshot of what I think Futamura views innovation as. How do we actually sort of go about it? People often say, how do you build a research portfolio? Actually, I've had the opportunity to do that. I sort of took this job on 6 years ago, which is when Futamura took over the business at that stage. Innovation hadn't been right at the forefront for, if you like, this part of the business, the cellulose side of the business. We had a bit of a blank piece of paper, and I kind of developed this idea that you needed to be thinking across different time frames. So the one thing I think people fail to do quite often is to really go back and learn from the past, do your literature review, say, why are we doing what we do today? So that's something that we always spend some time doing whenever we're starting any new project, or we're just thinking about what we want to do next. The other one is, it's coming back to this idea that innovation doesn't have to be the revolutionary. It can also be, if you like, the iterative sort of thing. So support here and now. Basically for us, for Futamura, the here and now is what's going to fund, or in a major way fund, those future works. It's going to be able to make big capital investments, which is something that we are sort of doing. And we want to get every last shred, if you like, of value out of what we do today. So we'll actually commit quite a lot of time to thinking about the day-to-day practices, the product improvements, process improvements, even just down to, at the minute, we have, a group just focused on, green, our green credentials, if you like. What are the little things we do in the business, from recycling, tin cans and that sort of thing. And then obviously, where my head mainly goes is this plan for the future, and really thinking as far out. We have a business, 5 years is often a time frame that people think about, okay, what's happening over the 5 years, and we have a 5-year plan. But actually, I believe in the innovation space, we can go well beyond that. And if you talk to our Japanese ownership, they really talk about 70 years, generations in advance, which when I first heard that, I found that a mind-blowing concept. So what is that then? I talked about the future. One of the things I can't possibly do in the time frame that I've got is give you a really detailed overview of what we actually do here. I would invite people, if you were really interested, come to the site and have a tour and see what our processes are. So I'm going to try and describe what we do in a few simple seconds with this slide here. But effectively, we're converting something called dissolving wood pulp, which is a product based on trees, from trees, via this process called the viscous process, developed in 1892, believe it or not. So we're using something that's well over 130 years old. That's the core to our process. And then we take that viscous solution, it's a solution of the wood pulp, and we do what we call cast. Basically, we turn that back into a solid, and we make this transparent, flexible packaging material. That really came around about in the 1930s. And then for a lot of the packaging applications, we need to give it some functionality, by which I mean maybe heat sealability, so it can stick to itself, or maybe it's moisture barrier, so that it's not, the product is protected from moisture. That's using basically a solvent coating technology that was invented by DuPont in the 1950s. So you can see what I'm saying here is we have this really well-established old process. So how do you actually think about that in a new way? So this is our vision at the minute, and it's to look at each one of those core process steps and say, well, how are we going to make it relevant and fit with what people are demanding, I think over the next 5-10 years for sure. So first of all, we take that first part of the process, the viscous process. It's probably about replacing that with higher efficiency, lower carbon. They're all things that you'll all heard, and going as chemical free as we possibly can, really clean that up as much as possible. Casting, a lot of the same sort of technology, but one of our concepts is to say, well, could we imagine now a new type of hybrid film where we're taking some of the core raw material, the cellulose, which is from the, if you like, from the wood, but maybe that can come from new sources, so from waste, organic material, for instance, agricultural waste. Can we process that and create a product that has more of a circularity to it? Okay, so where maybe it's oat waste is packing an oat biscuit, for instance, a really nice core concept. And that coatings, quite simply replace solvent with water and use much more modern technology. This isn't pie in the sky. These are real research programs that we have ongoing at the minute, and we are investing quite heavily in. And I could probably do hours on each of those, but I won't, because I'm sure nobody wants to listen to that right now. So finally, I said I was going to just try and touch on challenges, and I come back to this question. What could possibly be hard about what we're doing? Well, the answer is quite a lot. These are just a few examples, and I'm not going to dwell. Actually, I think through some of the presentations that have already been given and some of the discussions, the themes are all sort of quite common. I think things that really stand out, for us, in addition to that, are because we do have this well-established process, pace of change. You've got to marry, you've got to be able to respond to a customer that wants something in a couple of months, but maybe we're asking our process, our production team to do something, that's quite uncomfortable to them. Another big one that's in vogue here is, a lot of our changes at the minute are linked to government policy, especially over, packaging and plastic in the environment and things like that, and trying to keep up with it. When you're trying to innovate, it's quite a tricky thing to do at times. Another big one for me, certainly within Cumbria, is sort of really accessing high quality training for people. We do a lot of work here, as I'll touch on in a second, actually, about in our own people, and I think that's something we could really think about within the county. Would be my point. But yeah, there's lots of different sort of things. So yeah, these are all the challenges that we sort of face. How do then we try and mitigate those the best we can? So basically, at Futamura, I try and operate over 3 sort of key principles, things that I believe make us better or stronger innovators. And the first one is going right back to the start and have a clear vision. Okay, you've really got to understand what direction of travel you're taking. So you've got to collectively come together as a business. It's not just about R&D standing there or marketing standing there. It's about coming together collectively and saying, well, where do we see ourselves in the future? And you've got to communicate that right across the business, so everybody is moving in the same direction. Otherwise, you're really going to be, wading through mud at times when you're trying to make some of these big changes. Number 2, it's really easy to, especially in a business like ours, where we've been doing it for such a long time, to believe that, to work in a silo, to believe that you've got all the answers and nobody from the outside is going to be able to understand what you're doing. It's easy to tell yourself that, but actually we believe it's really important to spend a lot of time looking near and far. So whether it is in Cumbria or whether it is across the world, looking for good, I would say, our partners and suppliers. They are represented, by, it could be universities, it can be, equipment or material suppliers, maybe government-backed, research institutes. These are some of the people on this slide here that at Futamura we're working with, and there's some big heavy hitters in that. But yeah, absolutely something that we believe you need to spend a lot of time doing. And I'm coming up to my last slide, and I think it's a really important one, and it's this: invest in the future, even when times are hard. That's rarely in vogue at the minute. Times are extremely difficult with energy, prices higher than anybody's seen. Pretty much all of our raw materials are costed well above anything that we would have ever predicted, but we will continue to invest in the future. That could be from, from the top left in terms of lab or pilot equipment, right up to the top right, more pilot equipment, working with people outside who are building, different facilities for us, or maybe it's test houses or funded projects with universities. And, the last one I'll say is people. Okay, so bottom left picture there, we will continue to invest in training up, if you like, the next generation of innovators, be that in the R&D department or marketing or production. It's really important. Those are the people at the end of the day who are going to be delivering vision that you have today. They'll be delivering that in the future. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what innovation is in Futamura, and I'll invite any questions later. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Martin. That was really powerful, especially from the perspective, a good context, but also from the perspective of sort of process-driven innovation as well. So I'm sure we'll come back to that in the Q&A. Without further ado, if I could invite Chris Williams to present. Welcome, Chris.
Excuse me, you see now?
Yeah, we can see and hear you, Chris.
Sorry, I'm just double checking. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me this afternoon. Not something I'm used to, presenting to two kind of people. Usually it's universities and engineers. Anyway, so what to talk to you about today on innovation. So I've got a little bit of a story for you. First, I'll just give you a quick rundown of who we are and what we do. Okay, so we're M-Sport. We're a motorsport manufacturing company, predominantly. We're based here in Cumbria, up in Cockermouth. We're best known really for World Championship Rally. That's our flagship, let's say. A lot of our other business is mainly to do with motorsport. We produce a lot of vehicles. So produce what's called the FIA full opportunity, or the full ladder of cars. So from the small two-wheel drive race cars through to the full four-wheel drive cars that you see on the World Championship. We also work with other manufacturers. We're not only Ford. We work with Bentley too. So for Bentley, we do a turnkey operation. They wanted a GT3 car, so we designed a car for them. With the manufacturing and engineering. Now we build and supply the car to them worldwide. As well as that, we do after-sales support for them. So we do the warehousing, the parts supply business for them too. Looking a bit more to the future, we also do some work for some other clients. So Jaguar Land Rover, electric car project for them. That was based around the I-Pace. So we assisted them with the design of the car. They did a lot of it themselves, but we took on the chassis side for them, safety cages and stuff. Then from there, they wanted somebody to effectively run the championship. So we built a team for them. We take the cars around the world, eight rounds of the World Championship with electric vehicles. So that's kind of who we are and what we do. We've been quite successful over the years. Predominantly, we're a rally team. We've won 7 world titles and over 62 victories and many podiums. Okay, so getting on to innovation. What is innovation for us? So that's quite different. We're a sporting team. Innovation is something about competition. We're here to compete. So when I thought about it, I thought there's a good story that comes to mind. And it starts back in 2017. 2017, we went to Monte Carlo. We went with a new car. So we've been developing the car for 16, 17 months. It's all done to new regulations, step change in regulations. So we had a new car, and we've been very busy, let's say. So we go to Monte Carlo, and we're not the biggest team by a long way. We're about half the size of the three other players there. We won convincingly. Monte Carlo, we were first and third. We continued that year. We won the manufacturers and the drivers' championship. Each of our three different drivers, each one won at least round championship. We never finished lower than third at any point in the rounds. So it was a really good year. Come to this year, so 2022, and again we have a new car. There's been a step change in the regulations. We spent the last 18 months working with the new car, with some new technology, there's hybridization in the cars, and the space frame. So again, compressed time frame to develop a new car. There's 3 manufacturers in the championship this year. Again, we're by far the smallest, fraction of the funding of the other 2. We go to Monte Carlo. Again, we win, and convincingly as well. So again, this year, yeah, first and third. And the question is, why do we win? Why are we out there? Why are we beating bigger, better funded teams? Now, the reason for this is innovation. It's what we're quite good at as a small firm. So to move on for this, thought I'd give you a few ideas on our approach to it and what the top 3 principles are really to us here at M-Sport. So we'll work in this. So number 3, our third principle really is speed. We're fast to take new ideas. When someone has an idea, it's the first part for us is the responsiveness. Is it something that we can use? Is it something that's going to work for us? Let's get onto it quickly. So we're fast to take the new ideas from our team. Then fast to develop. We have tools, equipment that help us get from an idea to feasibility stage, and then from feasibility actually to testing. Once we get there, we have a lot of tools for rapid implementation. We also, it's not just parts, product, or car parts, but it's process, it's software, it's many areas that we work in. All of them, it's a similar thing. It's all about being fast to do it. And one of the key parts for us is reducing bureaucracy. If somebody has an idea, we can test it, we can implement it. It doesn't need to be signed off at the highest level. Small micro innovation works really well for us. Empowering employees to think, act, not have too many levels of sign off, be able to get the stuff into action. It works really well for us. So speed is my number 3. Number 2 is flexibility. You've got to be open to change. For us, change is a good thing. Change is positive. Change is, we're trying to do something that's going to make us go faster or improve the process. So we should be open to change. And flexibility and having the structure to make change and make change frequently to improve everything that we're doing, be it on an engineering side or on a process side, have the infrastructure there to say, okay, what we're doing today doesn't mean we're going to be doing it in 6 months or a year. In some cases, we're changing processes or software, we're doing it on a monthly basis. So change is something, and having the ability to, the flexibility to be able to have change and it's a fast-paced environment makes us good. And being able to communicate that change. So we've got some new stuff coming. It's who needs to know? How do we get it in? And how do we get it into the product or into the process as soon as possible? And having a good communication and the communication structure to get in. So that's my number 2. That's flexibility. But the key thing for us, 100% for innovation, it's all about the people. Sorry. Innovation is all about ideas. It's all about taking ideas and creating value from those ideas. And for us, it's all about people. So one of the things we have, innovation recruitment strategy. Education and intelligence and conventional ways, degrees and how people have done, is not actually for us a particularly good way for understanding how good people are at innovation. The one thing that stands out for all the people that we have is the people that are passionate are the people who are the best innovators. If they really are good at ideas and passionate about delivering those ideas, those are the people that work for us. If they're passionate about the sport or anything inside of our organisation, passion by far is the best driver of innovation. And it's self-motivating as well. Someone who's passionate about what they're doing will work harder and put in more hours. They're usually more creative and determined to try and get the job done. So people and passion is what drives us. And the last thing with people really is innovation as a culture. For us, it's quite positive because we can take an idea one day and make it happen quite quickly usually. On an engineering side, we have a lot of tools and equipment, so we can go from an idea to 3D CAD design, rapid prototyping parts, to get them onto the race cars. And people can see their ideas and innovations happen quickly, and that's another good thing because it's positive. You're always doing something in the right direction. But giving people the time to work on their ideas, another key bit. Some of the people who have the ideas, they also don't really have the knowledge to be able to get those ideas into practice. So filling the knowledge gap, helping the people get their ideas in, having a team that can work around the ideas and bring them to fruition. The last thing for the culture really is don't be afraid of failure. Many of our ideas don't work, but even if only 10% are working, it's driving us forward. It's making us better, making generally the cars faster. So how do we know if we're doing it right? There are a couple of things that surprisingly are good. People that say, could we do this? Have you ever thought about trying that? Those are the kind of things that tell us that we've got an innovative team, because they've always got trying to think out the box. Why don't we go and do this? Why don't we go that? Not always new ideas, some of them you may have heard before, but those kind of people and those kind of phrases is what you want to hear. And then thinking backwards, retrospectively, what is the best thing about the job for people who work here? Now, this comes up time and time again. The best thing for a lot of people here is to see their work come to fruition, and it comes to fruition quite quickly. To be able to see their work competing on a world championship level, having your parts you've designed on a car that's out there competing and winning, that's what drives us. Sorry, excuse me. So, how do we win? Well, we won Monte Carlo in 2017, and then we went and did it again this year. And we did it generally because we're faster than the other team. The methods we employ, we're better than they are. We can out-innovate them, we can just do it quicker, and we're always one step ahead of them, or it seems. And when it comes to a time-pressured environment, when we're trying to do this in only a few months, the bigger teams are slower to respond. They can't move as fast as us, or so it seems. So we seem to be able to out-innovate them just purely on speed. Then the next thing, again, we're flexible. We're very, very flexible. We'll have a plan, but we'll change the plan tomorrow if we think it's going to do us any be better for us. So flexibility is what we do well. But lastly, people. We're a small team. There's about 150 of us compared to some of the other bigger teams. but the passion and the dedication and the determination of the team is what makes us win. Thank you. That's it from me. If there's any other questions.
Thank you, Chris. It certainly takes me back to a previous job when I worked in motorsport, and we're at a team where we weren't winning, yeah, and it's very tough, yeah, and the innovation agenda is just put more in focus and being brave when the market's tough. If you take it in that way, is so important. That really fascinating. It's also really fascinating. You really sort of talk about the people agenda, bringing that to life, because people are, you know, the innovators, the people that make it happen. So that was quite powerful. So we've got a few questions that have come in. Firstly, if I go to the Q&A board, there's a question from Ian Wheeler. So it's a question for Martin. So Martin, excellent presentation. As a foreign-owned business, where is your level of innovation versus Japan and USA in your field? Martin, if you could try and answer that one, that'd be good.
Yeah, no, that's it's a good question, and there's a few ways of answering it, depending on how you want to think about it. From a pure, if you like, staffing perspective, then there's a pretty much even split between Japan and the UK. So the UK here in Wigton, we've always serviced both our site and the American site. So the American site has no, if you like, direct innovation resource, and we go and do. So I've actually spent quite a lot of my life going and working over in America, at Kansas there. So from a staffing perspective, very similar. From a if you like, a portfolio or an ideas perspective over the years, one of the things that was really interesting was when we got took over by Futamura, and we had this kind of like open book exercise. So I met with their R&D director, and we kind of said, you know, these are the things that we want to work on or have worked on in the past. And there's actually quite a good match of like, you know, some of the ideas that have come along and that we've worked on. What I would say is, you know, I talked about, if you like, you know, the passion I have for them as an ownership, because they are quite inspirational. I think where they're better is they've been much more entrepreneurial over the years in terms of the levels of investment from themselves, but also the way that they go out and leverage, if you like, these sort of government money to really push some of these projects on. And you can see that in some of the technologies that they have. So they're a more diverse firm than we are in Cumbria. But what I would say is, you know, I think that's really empowering. So over the last sort of few years, you know, I think that's something that we're really learning, that we can be that little bit more entrepreneurial and push forward. And that's what's going to really hammer home the innovation. I think somebody said, you know, it was Stephen that said, you know, it's all well and good coming up with the ideas, but you've got to know how you're going to commercialize them. So that's probably something I would say. Yeah, hope that answers the question.
It sounds like you're trusted to innovate as well by your parent company, by the sounds of it.
Trusted
really
and encouraged, and it's, you know, what's happened over the last few years is it's become a really collaborative thing. So I've been over to Japan a couple of times. We've actually gone and done some physical, practical work over there. They've seen our ideas, they've taken it and developed it. So now we're innovating over, you know, I don't know what, a few thousand miles. You know, through COVID, it's been tricky, but we've managed to keep that up. So it's really empowering process, actually, when you've got good ownership like that.
Thank you. If I move on, a question in the chat here from Karen Dickens at Sellafield Limited wants to know how they balance environmental, social and economic aspects of innovation. So I suppose that's a question for Rob, Martin or Chris in that regard. So the balancing of the environmental and social.
I'll have a go at answering. I think it's a conversation. I think that's the starting point, and it's a conversation with many people, because if you think about the societal impacts. So the people piece is absolutely key in all this. I completely agree that we need smart people using the best tools, smart tools. But if you think about the societal bit, it's about kids, it's about people leaving school, apprentice training, grads, all the way through education, lifetime training, all those sorts of things. You got to work with them and talk to them and engage them with what is coming. And I think, for instance, in the field of robotics and artificial intelligence, we're just at the start. And this is a technology which, is only 30 years old, even is it that old even? So imagine what it's going to be like in 10 years time, or 20 or 30 or 100. And that means to say that stuff is going to change. And I think the honest thing is to have an honest and open conversation with people about the environmental impact, how we improve safety yet further if we want to, societal impact, economic impact. And one of our aspirations with RAICo is to make an open space, to have it so that it's open, so that people can come in and actually see what's going on and engage them.
Excellent. The openness as well, in terms of, I suppose I'll lead on to a bit more collaboration. I think I also heard from Martin that you'd be open to collaborate as well, with people coming to visit as well. So that's something I think we all need to do across Cumbria to answer some of those questions. Next question from Megan O'Neill from System Design and Strategy asked, what barriers do you feel need to be addressed to promote further innovation and support current activities? So what are some of those barriers? Anyone want to try and think about that? Maybe Chris? I don't know, you probably have lots of barriers. Financial maybe, or anyone's perspective?
Well, I'll chip in again. Let's say a slightly more negative thing. The opposite to innovation is, well, some people see innovation as disruption. And so that's a challenge, because actually in Chris's sport, actually you're trying to disrupt each other every day of the week, aren't you? You're in a competition. And actually in the nuclear sector, you don't really want people to be in competition in the same way. It's a different environment. So sometimes what the flip side of innovation is often people holding on to what has worked yesterday. And so actually, I think that's for me, that's the biggest challenge, is showing people what's possible and then enabling them to move. And when it's a lot of people, that requires, you need to be a tugboat, and you're trying to actually change the direction of a big ship that you're trying to get into harbour or get out to sea.
Absolutely. Do any of the panel members want to build on that? I mean, there's a comment here, innovation is survival. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? A question for Chris. To what extent is access to skills in Cumbria a constraint?
For sure, it's difficult. We find, majority of motorsport and what have you is done in Milton Keynes area.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we are quite remote in that respect. We generally recruit Europe-wide, so we have quite a diverse team here. That's not a bad thing. We have some local people, but we also, much further afield. And again, it's back down to, for us, it's not always, we're looking for people with the passion. To be in the sport, you've really got to want to be in the sport. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's not easy to do. There's a lot of dedication needed. We do a lot of traveling, we do lots of competition. It's many hours. So finding people who want to be part of the team, who really want to compete, who really want to be involved, those are the people we're looking for, and it is a needle in the haystack a lot of the time that you're looking for. So yeah, no, it is one of our biggest challenges. Not easy.
Very good. There's a build on that question as well. Question for Martin. You talked about accessing skills and training facilities as a constant challenge in Cumbria. What specifically is the issue, and to what extent is accessing skills a constraint for yourself?
Yeah, again, it's a good question, and yeah, thank you for picking on that point. That was actually going to be one of the, my answers to the, if you like, what what can we do, if you like, to improve. But to sort of put that in a frame or a picture, I talked about what we do, the process we operate here, the technology, even the market. It's quite sort of unique, which means we rely on really taking in hopefully well-skilled people, but upskilling them and giving them a lot of experience. We've got a lot of people that have been here for a long time, myself being sort of one of them. But what you really want to be able to do is go outside and access or work with people to develop good training programs, be that if you like the core functionality, like the hard skills in terms of science, laboratory, but also business, marketing skills, right across the sort of board. And I feel certainly within the science sort of sphere, if you like, naturally there's a lot of bias or looking towards the nuclear sort of sector, but that's kind of understandable. So we end up having to look quite far afield, and that's quite tricky, especially when you're dealing with young people, apprentices. We're sending them sort of long distances to go and get their education, or they have to do it in sort of block learning. So I would love to see us really strengthen the offering and if you like, the diversity of the offering in Cumbria, and it is prohibitive. I think we do a good job of working our way around it, but yeah, I would encourage us to do that.
Thank you. I think finally we've got a question stroke comment from Peter. Great to hear from industries which are have a technology base in Cumbria, but there are the questions that just moved. I was just reading it here. But we have other industries such as farming and tourism which also need to innovate, which is a really good perspective, really. But don't have the same technology base. How do we encourage them to innovate? I think the question for all of us here is as the economic picture across Cumbria is, we need to collaborate across all industries, and hopefully in the future another innovation workshop, if we could hold one that has a slightly different focus around perhaps some of the other industries within the region, but for us all to participate to try and find that cross-pollination of the innovation agenda. I think for me, before I sort of do a little bit of reflection and just do a bit of a wrap up so we can finish on time, heard some great stuff around setting the scene, some great examples there. So thank you to everyone that took the time this afternoon. Process-driven innovation, real message around collaboration. Talked a lot, Rob, about maybe the more robotics, but I'd love to hear more about AI and how that will spread right across all aspects of innovation as well, machine learning, wherever that takes us to. But there's some real key points around the people agenda, especially within our region, and how we collaborate, sort of focusing on the capital, the skills and the connections. So we've got a few, or I've got a few next steps. So firstly, we want to repurpose an existing LEP loan fund to make it a grant fund to support our businesses to either innovate or decarbonize their business. So really, I think it'd be really great for us to sort of launch that and to get people's get the pull. I think someone mentioned earlier on, the value comes when businesses, however small or large they are, create the pull for innovation, and hopefully we can provide a small level of support by repurposing that into a grant fund. The second thing is, obviously I've reflected as being big BAE in Barrow, employing 10,000 people, and limitless access to technology and innovation in that regard, and there's nothing like a national pandemic for you to think differently about how we can help the local region. And we were lucky enough to help the local health authority innovate around a number of things relating to the sort of COVID response. But the key thing that we took away from that is actually not trying to give technology or solutions, but to actually provide support in terms of the process, that systems engineering approach of helping small businesses or whatever who've perhaps got a problem, how to get to a set of requirements and get that through to through the technology readiness levels to something that's a workable solution. So I'm pleased to say that BA will provide free of charge support from some of our engineers to sort of promote a sort of more systems engineering approach to hopefully provide some engineering support to the innovation agenda across Cumbria. Again, mirrored with some of the offers we've already had in terms of open door, in terms of sharing best practice, which leads us on to the third thing we're looking to implement is an innovation networking program to bring together a number of businesses to work collaboratively to support each other in developing their innovation within their businesses. So I think those are the three areas that I would like to sponsor on behalf of the Cumbria LEP with everyone's support to sort of move the agenda forward. So hopefully when we talk about this subject in the future, we'll be talking about much more cross-fertilization of that innovation agenda. These are alongside obviously the excellent work that we're already doing. And again, I think Joe mentioned it earlier, there will be some information sent out in terms of the tax reliefs and benefits that small businesses can get, or any businesses can get from R&D and patents as well. But from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time out this afternoon, participating in the chat, in the Q&A, but most importantly to all of those presenters who took the time to present today. Much appreciated. I wish you all good luck, and I hope to work with you again. And I do encourage anyone, if you want to play a more active role as part of the Cumbria LEP, please reach out. We're looking for as much help and support that we can possibly get. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.